Alrighty. Week 2 with Bruce Pritchard as the head writer. Looks like they got Promo Palooza out of their systems last week and gave us some actual wrestling this time. The general direction of the storylines was laid out, so now they had more room to breathe, which allowed for some honest-to-God action on this total non-stop action show where wrestling supposedly matters. Unfortunately, those 3 giant plot holes I talked about last week were not addressed. Immortal still exists. Bischoff and Karen Jarrett are still employed for some reason. They offered up no explanation for any of these things, and at this point I highly doubt they ever will. So apparently these logic gaps are just something that I'm going to have to live with. However, once you get past that, there are a lot of improvements being made here. My other complaint last week was that they needed to tighten up the individual segments and not devote more time than is needed to each one. This week that started to happen. Now, it was still an issue in certain segments, but it's like they took it from a 10 down to about a 5 this week, and that's a definite step up. Also, it looks like they're sticking with the slower pacing and generally longer segments as opposed to the rapid-fire, let's assault the audience with 50 different things all at once approach that Russo's become infamous for. And make no mistake about it, this makes a world of difference. 45 minutes into the show, and they'd really only covered 3 or 4 storylines, and yet each one of them actually felt like they mattered because they had enough time devoted to them to make them seem significant. Now, I bitched about this for ages. If you focus on a fewer number of storylines, it frees up the time you need to cover each one more effectively. Now, the downside of this is that if they're doing it that way, they can't cover as many storylines as they used to in 2 hours. And this means that they're going to have to be really, really careful with how they budget their time from now on. They need to prioritize and not give too much time to the wrong things. And that's definitely an issue that they need to work on. You want an example? Look no further than the storyline with Bischoff and his son. I swear, freaking Garrett Bischoff got more screen time on this show than James Storm. Really? Really? Why on earth are you spending so much time on this? Why is a referee suddenly getting the biggest babyface push on this show?
Oh, what a bunch of bull.
I really failed to understand what the point of this is. They had 2 lengthy in-ring segments covering this, as well as some backstage stuff on top of that and a video package. They even gave it the main event spot. And all things considered, not having Bobby Roode in the final segment, not ending the show with him staring down James Storm was absolutely idiotic.
You people are fools!
Now, at the time I'm recording this, the quarter hours haven't come out yet, so I don't know what kind of viewership these segments are drawing. But even if they're getting ratings, you're devoting a hell of a lot of screen time to a program about Bischoff feuding with a referee. What is the payoff going to be for all this? If Garrett is going to become a wrestler, that's one thing, but isn't throwing him into such a major storyline just going to expose him as being completely unprepared for this spot? It didn't seem like his mic skills were all that great. I have no idea if the guy can wrestle. I mean, yeah, we don't really have a lot to go on with him yet, but still, this just seems really unwise.
This whole show is ridiculous!
Aside from that, there was a better balance of wrestling versus talking here. Not a perfect balance by any means, but a better balance than last week. The opening segment had James Storm come out and cut a promo. I'm very glad they started the show with him like they should have. He makes like a good babyface and thanks the people he needs to thank. Then he brings out Fortune and gives Bobby Roode a title shot. Samoa Joe comes out to dispute this, which sets up a #1 contenders match. A far cry from the talking marathon we had last week. This accomplished everything it needed to in about 10 minutes without feeling rushed. So this part was timed very well. Now, granted, putting Samoa Joe in a #1 contenders match after all the losses he's had recently was just eye-roll worthy, and it really telegraphed the finish of the match, not that it wasn't pretty obvious anyway. I think if Kurt Angle didn't have the hamstring injury, it probably would have been him in that spot, but if they want to let Kurt Angle heal up and train for the Olympics, I guess they needed to get someone to pinch hit for him here, and Joe got elected. Fine, whatever, it's not a huge deal. After that, we got a wrestling match. It was Christopher Daniels versus Rob Van Dam. Yes, the match did end in a DQ, but I was more or less okay with that this time because they actually let these guys wrestle for a little while before Daniels broke out the toolbox. Now, if Vince Russo was still the head writer, this match probably would have been less than 2 minutes long. But letting these guys go for a while before you do the DQ finish, that earns you a lot of goodwill. That can make a cheap finish a lot more tolerable. But if you're going to have like a 90-second match that ends in a DQ, it's like, why even have the match at all? This way is better. After that was a knockout segment. Gail Kim cut her "I'm back and I'm a heel now" promo, and then she had a match with Tara. This was another segment that really benefited from having more time devoted to it. It made Gail's return seem more impactful, and it looks like she'll have no trouble getting over as a heel. I do wish they'd explained her reasons for turning heel a little bit better. It didn't have to be a huge explanation, just something like, "Once upon a time, this company called me the greatest women's wrestler alive, but they didn't want to pay me like I was. So, with the economy in the toilet, I had no choice but to swallow my pride and go work for another company that treated me like crap for 3 years. While I was gone, I watched the knockout division that I put on the map turn into a damn joke," reference Velvet Sky. "Now I'm back and I'm bitter as hell about the whole thing." That was about all they needed. But instead, they just kind of glossed over it with the typical "we didn't really put a lot of thought into this" explanation. Nevertheless, this was a good segment. My only real complaint was that, once again, they went to commercials right after the match started, when they could have done it right before the match started. So, that's still a problem. What we saw of the match was good stuff. I think Gail might have been a little bit rusty, but hell, even a rusty Gail Kim is a better worker than most of the other women they've got right now. Also, something that was just wonderful about this match. There were no less than 3 people at ringside during this thing, and still, the match actually had a clean finish. Now, up until this point, this had been a fine show with very little to complain about. Then the poor man's Zack Ryder Robbie E showed up. And God help us all, he brought Rob Terry with him. Ha-ha! And why? Because the writers decided to resurrect this asinine Robbie Eric Young feud, presumably as a paper-thin way to feature another Jersey Shore cast member they brought in. Ronnie from the Jersey Shore. So we're doing this again, huh? Sure, why the hell not? After all, the JWoww Angelina thing turned out so well, didn't it? No, wait, that was a complete disaster. Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't JWoww and Angelina score like the lowest rated segments of those shows? Why in the world are you doing this again? Clearly your audience doesn't want to see it. Are you that desperate for some TMZ plugs that you want to waste more money on these idiots?
This whole show violates everything about my journalistic integrity.
Look, I don't watch Jersey Shore. I don't care about Jersey Shore. I don't know a damn thing about Jersey Shore. But if there's one thing I do know about Jersey Shore, it's that unless you've got Snooki or The Situation, most likely people aren't going to give a shit. WWE already beat you to the punch with Snooki, and they generated more mainstream buzz with her than you could ever hope to. So trotting out Ronnie now? You're just making yourselves look Bush League. Seriously, what do you hope to accomplish with this?
I was a war correspondent, and now I'm covering this!
Whatever. Hopefully after the Ronnie angle is done with, this stupid feud will just go away. Eric and Robbie had another match for the TV title here. It was only Eric's second title defense in 5 months, by the way. Wasn't really a bad match, at least it was short. Less than 60 seconds, so Robbie didn't have enough time to put the crowd to sleep with a rest hold like he always does. That's really all you can say about it. They actually did something to progress the Jarrett Hardy feud this week. I still don't care about the feud. I don't want to see established guys facing each other anymore. They should both be facing guys who could get a rub from working with them, especially Jarrett. But this wasn't bad. I do think it was kind of overdone. You know, Jeff Hardy gets attacked before the match, then he wins the match with Bully Ray. It's not really a bad match at all. And then he gets attacked after the match too. The match was good. You know, I just thought the 2 attacks on Hardy was overkill. Unfortunately, overkill is pretty much a given when you're in a program with Jeff Jarrett. That guy just does not understand the concept of less is more. He just doesn't. But anyway, this certainly wasn't a bad segment by any means. They just got a little carried away with it. Unfortunately, the last 20 minutes of the show are something I have to take issue with. The main event with Samoa Joe versus Bobby Roode was good. It was a good match. But as I said before, ending the show with the Bischoff family soap opera was a big mistake in my opinion. I don't care what the ratings were, alright? You're trying to build up 2 new main eventers here with Roode and Storm. Having them play second fiddle to a referee just when they're finally breaking into the world title scene is not going to help them. If you absolutely had to do the Garrett Bischoff thing, I would have shortened that segment by a few minutes, because it did run longer than it needed to, given that time to Rude and Joe. Then I would have switched the segments around, done the Bischoff thing, then had the number one contenders match go on last, like it should have, because not ending the show with that made the title match next week look less important than it should be.
I'm done! I am done with you! I'm done with this entire show!
So Rude wins, which means they're doing Rude vs. Storm next week. Really don't agree with them rushing into that so fast. I went over this last week. I really think a slow build-up to this would have served these guys much better. Storm hasn't even proven himself as the champion yet, and you're already throwing Rude in there? It really seems too soon for this, but we'll see where it goes. On a whole, I like this show. The slower pacing is such an improvement. They're allotting screen time much more effectively now, which takes the whole show up a huge notch. The issue is some of the storylines they're choosing to feature. The Robbie E shit, the melodrama with the Bischoffs, etc. A lot of that seems like a big waste of time to me. But despite those problems, this really is a massive step up from what we've been getting for a long time now. The Macon, Georgia shows are up next. That's where we're going to see Storm vs. Rude for the world title for the first time. And I'm excited for that. I'm a little anxious too. But as I said before, the slow build is going to be the key here. As long as they're patient with it, let that tension build up over time and don't rush anything, I think the eventual feud between these guys could be awesome. See you then. Whoa. Hello, what's this? Spoilers for the Macon, Georgia TV tapings. Well, I suppose one little peek wouldn't hurt. Oh!